Hi, this is Joseph Williams Jr. Just recently, President Trump had a town hall meeting with undecided voters, and it ended like this.
Time for one final question. It comes from Ashley West of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania.
Hi, Mr. Trump.
Hi, Ashley.
Sorry. My question is, what has been the most difficult part of your presidency, and what have you learned from it?
So I think without question, I would say, because things were going so well, I think I'd have to say the whole COVID, the China virus, as I call it, because it comes from China. So I think it's a much more accurate term. But it's been very difficult. It's been so sad. As an example, talking to you about your mother, it's just such a sad situation. Yeah, we're getting there. We will get there. It's going to happen. But it's been very difficult. Nobody's seen anything like this probably since 1917.
What did you learn from it?
I learned that life is very fragile. I knew people that were powerful people, strong people, good people, and they got knocked out by this and died. 6 people. It was 5 until about 2 weeks ago. Now it's 6. But I've learned that life is very fragile because these were strong people, and all of a sudden they were dead. They were gone. And it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of a country that could have stopped it. And I made a great trade deal with China. But it was all, I feel so differently about that deal now. It's a great deal. It was good for the farmers, good for the manufacturers. But I don't view it the same way. It was good for us, but I don't view it the same way because of the horror of this disease that really could have been stopped at the border.
Could you have done more to stop it?
I don't think so. I think what I did by closing up the country, I think I saved 2, maybe 2.5, maybe more than that lives. I really don't think so. I think we did a very good job. I don't know if that's been recognized. We've made a lot of governors feel good. We've made some reputationally, we've enhanced their reputation. They didn't have anything. We got them the supplies. We got them the ventilators. We've made a lot of people look good that shouldn't look good, to be honest with you. We're out of time.
So, when all is said and done, he said there was nothing else he could have done. Well, at this time, the coronavirus worldwide is at 30,217,420 cases. The death toll is almost at 1 million people, at 946,847. So where does that leave us here at home? We currently have 6,677,516 cases, with a sad number of losses at 197,682. Now, if you look at the time cover, we are close to reaching that 200,000 milestone. The numbers that are displayed on cable news is to serve as a reminder of what we have lost during this time. These numbers are not just for statistical information. Each number that is added to this total figure represents a person. A mother, a father, a son, a daughter, a grandparent, uncle, aunt, friend. Anyone close to you could be, right? These are the connections we have lost when another one is added to this total number. So these numbers that is displayed are so important to us that that is to make sure that we will always remember what we've lost. Now we know that the numbers vex Trump because it shows how we are failing in this pandemic. I mean, it is such a problem for him that he had all the data from the CDC that had been given by the hospital sent to the Health and Human Services. Now, this is a problem because now we know that HHS has been doctoring information to fit the president's narrative, to make him look good. So how reliable are the numbers that are being released by HHS department? I mean, because of this change in the criteria for testing, changed with objection by the CDC scientists, if there are a reduction of tests being taken, the number will decrease. It won't mean it is because we are beating the virus. If we don't test, we won't know who has it. So with the decrease in testing, which is very evident of his order of slowing down the testing, with all this happened, we often wonder what could have been done. Trump and his followers keep saying how great the response was. Well, if this is what a great response is, then God help us for a bad one. Now, you often hear from Joe Biden about the Pandemic Playbook. This is what was left when the Obama administration left and it transitioned over to Trump. Now, because it was from the Obama administration, we know for sure they refused to even acknowledge it. But even Mitch McConnell had to acknowledge that there was a plan. Now, with the recent upheaval in the different cities across the country, the intensity this is happening is indeed a distraction from the pandemic. With the killing of Black Americans by police officers triggering protests by those who wish to have this stop, the president continues to advocate for law and order to calm the situation. The escalation of these acts of violence drowns out what we need to follow up with regards to the COVID crisis. It's the old bait and switch. Now, if you would like to, join me in reading from the Book of the Dawn. That's what I call it. And if you can, turn with me to page 214. Now, if you're a Trump person, I would figure that you have one of these, right? Because this is their holy grail. Now, under the title, under the chapter, Gaming, the Building of the Boardwalk, I want to start reading from the first paragraph here on 214. Once we finish our negotiation, the final step was approval of the deal by Holiday's board of directors. In many situations, board approval of management initiatives is merely a formality. In this case, I worry that Rose might use his board to help him get out of the deal, or at least force changes in it. Rose scheduled his annual board of directors meeting in Atlantic City, so that the board will have an opportunity to see the proposed site and also to assess our progress in the construction. It was the latter that worried me. Since we had yet to do much work on the site, 1 week before the board meeting, I got an idea. I called in my construction supervisor and told him that I wanted him to round up every bulldozer and dump truck he could possibly find and put them to work on my site immediately. Over the next week, I said I wanted him to transform my 2 acres of nearly vacant property into the most active construction site in the history of the world. What the bulldozers and dump trucks did wasn't important. I said, so as long as they did a lot of it. If they got some actual work accomplished, all the better. But, if necessary, he should have the bulldozers dig up dirt from one side of the site and dump it on the other. They should keep doing that, I said, until I give them other instructions. The supervisor looked a little bewildered. Mr. Trump, he said, I have to tell you that I've been in the business for a lot of years and this is the strangest request I ever got. But I'll do my best. 1 week later, I accompanied top Holiday Inn executives and the entire board of directors out to the boardwalk. It looked as if we were in the midst of building the Grand Kool-Aid Dam. There were so many pieces of machinery on the site that they could barely maneuver around each other. These distinguished corporate leaders looked on, some of them visibly awed. I'll never forget one of them turning to me, shaking his head and saying, you know, it's great when you're a private guy and you can tell and you can just pull out all the stops. A few minutes later, another board member walked over to me. His question was very simple. How come, he said, that guy over there is filling up that hole which he just dug. This was difficult for me to answer, but fortunately, this board member was more curious than he was skeptical. The board walked away from the site absolutely convinced that it was the perfect choice. 3 weeks later, on June 30th, 1982, we signed a partnership agreement. So, after reading this, you can see the work he goes through to manipulate what he will show you and what he wants you to think. This is a practice he spent years mastering and is very critical to how he works his way while as president. What the news media is reporting on what the news media is reporting and what is going on with his administration, he keeps calling it fake news. They are lying to his supporters. That's what he's telling them. So he even went to tell them that what you are hearing and saying is not happening. Now, this tactic is very evident as to how he is conducting his COVID-19 response. Instead of working on getting rid of the problem and helping the American people, he is doing everything in his power to keep from doing this and trying to create a narrative that is not in our best interest. Now remember, he is a reality TV star, you can say. You can make anything look good on TV. It's easy. You got writers writing it up for you as you go along. Now, that doesn't work in real life. When people die on your favorite TV show, the actors get to go home to their families when their scene ends. But when they die in the real world, these people, there is a loss, something you can't fix with a rewrite. And then that's when you realize the total abdicating of the government's responsibilities are happening when they talk about herd immunity and say it's okay to let 1 to 3% of the American population die. Rachel Maddow worked the math as to what we could be looking at if this herd immunity would hit us, right? So, if we're looking at 65% of 330 million people, that's 215 million Americans. Now, we're currently at where we are with over 6 million people, right? Well, you multiply that by 2.9%, right? 2.97%. That's 6.3 million people dead. I don't know. What the president said years ago about people who support him, he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and won't lose any support. Now he's on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza, and he's letting Americans die because it's much easier to do that than to actually do something. It is amazing the grade curve his supporters are giving him because they got scared because they had a black president. Now, just a sidetrack for a moment, if you remember, back in the olden days, John Boehner stated that his plans for the Obama agenda was, we're going to do everything, and I mean everything we can do to kill it, stop it, slow it down, whatever we can. And then you got Mitch McConnell, when he summed up his plan for the National Journal. The single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Now, this declaration from these party leaders at the time was a very clear and precise message to their party and to the world that they will not work with a black president. They would make sure that the first black president of the United States is going to fail. That was their mission. And then you have people that supported them say how they hated Obama, right? That he was the worst president ever. But But when they say those things over and over again, do you know what I hear when they said that? Do you understand what they were actually saying in code? They were calling him a nigger. That they wanted this nigger to fail. That's what they were saying. That they hate this nigger. That's what they were saying in code. I've never heard them say anything like that to any other president that was in power, that was duly elected. They may have had their disagreements. They may not always, not always disagree. But to outright say they wanted him to fail. If the president fails, so does the country. And on top of that, they kept saying all kinds of things to degrade him, to try to make him look worthless, incompetent. And you know what? It really frustrated him that for a second, not for 1 second, that they could bring him down to his knees. Because their fragile minds and egos cannot process that the idea that this black college-educated lawyer senator, who is now president, could run this country and take it back in the right direction to be prosperous. Because with him being elected, shattered the white line of succession of leadership in this country. Now, he wasn't perfect. No president is perfect, especially the present occupant that's in there now. Now, I have my criticism of it, but how bad could he have been if he helped give health care to people who needed it? Of course, the health care program was not perfect. All right? It wasn't. But it was a start, a springboard to something good and better for all those people who didn't have health insurance before that now can get health care, fix themselves, get better, so that they can work, take care of their family. How was that wrong? What the hell was wrong with that? I just don't get it. And you say you hated this man. Why? He even reduced the deficit and raised the GDP. And then they still complain that it wasn't good enough, it wasn't fast enough, it wasn't big enough. Yes, it was a steady growth. But it was destroyed when he came here. It's like a car that was stripped naked, down to the skeleton, to the chassis. He had to rebuild it. He had to do things to get it on the road again. And it still wasn't good enough. But it was in the right direction. The reduction in unemployment, it was close to 10%. And then by the he left, it was just below 5%. How is that wrong? How is that bad? How could you look at that? How could you say he did a bad job? That he was the worst president ever? Everything he did was not for his benefit. It was to help you. Help America. And those who didn't like him or were afraid because he was black, you lost your minds. And here we are. But they came up with the greatest scandal in the world. They came up with a tan suit. How's that? Now, to get back to the business of what we're here for. What we're looking at here is that putting together information to put together a timeline on what happened from start to finish. Now, I utilize resources from the New York Times for a timeline. I use resources from MSNBC for their timeline. And also I use information from our world data with the numbers and figures in regards to the pandemic and how it took place and who was affected and so forth and when it happened. And also, which is very intricate with this, is a testimony from Dr. Bright, the whistleblower. He was in the mix. He was there. So we use information from his testimony to show exactly what happened. Now, then you have the Republican chairwoman, and this is what she had to say.
How the president continues to try to downplay the severity of the virus. We're still have a caseload that is much higher than the Western world. I mean, again, you can say all these things. The results speak for themselves. You compare us to the rest of the Western world, and we have failed. Is there any way to look at this and compare to the Western world and say that we've done better than other countries?
I will just tell you right now, if Democrats were in charge, if Joe Biden had his way, go look at his statements in January when he said the president was being xenophobic and hysterical for closing the borders to China. No. He was running for president and he had the same data and the same information. And while Democrats were trying to impeach this president was taking decisive action. So I think it's disgusting to take a crisis in our country and try and lay it at the feet of the president. And where is the outrage at China? As we're hearing more and more stories come forward and research coming forward that they knew about it earlier, that they weren't transparent. What about the WHO that had one job, Chuck, one job, to warn the world about a pandemic, and they failed? And this is a president saying, we're going to hold you accountable. We're not going to give you...
So, she said the WHO did not warn the U.S. Well, we're going to take a timeline from the WHO and see exactly what was actually done to see if there's anything that we missed or if they did not give us the right information at the right time. And then finally, I got the greatest timeline of all. The timeline from the Trump campaign website, which is the Trump administration's decisive action to combat the coronavirus, right? So, what we're going to do is that we're going to compile all that information, and then we're going to see what would happen if the administration used the playbook that the Obama administration left after they gone. Now, before we get started, I just want to walk through a few things of some more decisive actions the Trump administration made when they took over. So, first one is the U.S. Pandemic Response Team created by President Obama in 2016. Well, that was disbanded by President Trump. Next is the CDC's China-based expert on pandemic response and containment. Well, he was fired by President Trump. Now, there's some, question exactly of whether he was really terminated or if just through budgetary reasons. But no matter what, whatever circumstances happened in order to get them out of there, it was the fact that he wasn't there no more, or whatever organization in China was not there anymore. And then we have the U.S. Intelligence Agency reports warning of the pandemic threat in January 2020, which then was ignored by President Trump. Now, before we get started, we're going to pick up from the U.S. intelligence report. And I'm going to read from the Washington Post's report on this. And it was titled, U.S. Intelligence Reports from January and February Warn About a Likely Pandemic. It states the U.S. intelligence agencies were issuing ominous classified warnings in January and February about the global danger posed by the coronavirus, while President Trump and lawmakers played down the threat and failed to take action that might have slowed the spread of the pathogen, according to U.S. officials familiar with the spy agency reporting. The intelligence report didn't predict when the virus might land on U.S. shores or recommend particular steps the public health officials should take, issues outside the preview of the intelligence agencies. But they did track the spread of the virus in China and later in other countries, and warned that Chinese officials appeared to be minimizing the severity of the outbreak. Taken together, the reports and warnings painted an early picture of the virus that showed the characteristics of a global encircling pandemic that could require governments to take swift actions to contain it. But despite the consistent flow of reporting, Trump continued publicly and privately to play down the threat the virus posed to Americans. Lawmakers, too, did not grapple with the virus in earnest until this month, as officials scrambled to keep citizens in their homes and hospitals. So, you have a network of agencies that are looking out for the best interest in a way to protect the United States, and you ignore it, right? You don't do what you got to do by taking that information and actively applying it to help. But we're going to look at it. We're going to look at this playbook to see exactly what the playbook consisted of and see how it could have benefited us if we followed it. So we're going to start off with the first page, which states, Playbook for early response to high consequence emerging infectious disease threats and biological incidents. Now that's what the playbook was called. Now, we have the table of contents, which in the executive summary, which has the purpose of the playbook, policy coordination and exercise in the playbook, the risk assessment dashboard, which we will look at. There is an international one and a domestic one. Now we're going to concentrate on the domestic side, because even though it's domestically for us back home, it still incorporates some of the information from the international. So it all ties together. So then we have chapter 2, which has the decision-making rubrics, which would be the effectively actions that you're looking to take, questions you're asking for each situation that you may have. Now, page 4. We're going to read through the purpose of the playbook, which states, the goal of the playbook for high consequence emerging infectious disease threats and biological incidents playbook is to assist U.S. government experts and leaders in coordinating a complex U.S. government response to a high consequence emerging disease threat anywhere in the world with the potential to cause an epidemic, pandemic, or other significant public health event by providing a decision-making tool that identifies 1. Questions to ask, 2. Agency counterparts to consult for answers to each, and 3. Key decisions which may require deliberation through the Presidential Policy Directive process or its successor, the National Security Council process. The playbook also includes sample documents that can be used for interagency meetings that need to be called in at each stage. While each emerging infectious disease threat will present itself in a unique way, consistent capabilities-based approach on addressing these threats will allow for faster decisions which more target expert subject matter input from federal departments and agencies. Right? Keep your focus, keep your eyes forward, and trying to help stop this thing from spreading. Okay? So, we're going to look at page 5 and discuss the risk assessment dashboard, which is a key recommendation from the World Health Organization is the need to assess the risk of an infectious disease threat before it becomes a public health emergency of international concern. Based on the WHO assessment guidance, Table 1 and 2 provide dashboards intended to serve as guidance for discussion on how to best assess the risk of an evolving infectious disease threat along 4 critical dimensions. 1. Epidemiology. 2. Humanitarian development and public health impact. 3. Security, political stability. And 4. Transmission, outbreak potential for public concern in the United States. There are several epidemiological risk assessment tools that exist for specific disease categories and that have clear criteria for assessing the level of threat. The following dashboards are not intended to supplant these tools, but are intended to overlay other security and humanitarian concerns to achieve a broader picture of the threat. And additionally, a dashboard is not intended to serve as a replacement, but a comprehensive risk assessment, but rather serve as a quick snapshot to inform policymakers' strategic decision-making process. So it's a guideline. It's there to help you, right? It's there to keep you focused in on what you got to do. Okay? Now, page 31 is the Domestic Playbook Decision-Making Rubric for Assessment and Response. Now, the following assumptions will apply to an early response to a high-consequence emerging infectious disease threat in the United States. Early in the emergence of an emerging infectious disease threat, either within or outside the United States, there will be more that is unknown than what is known. Decision makers will choose courses of actions with incomplete information. Okay? Just like what we have here. It's new, we don't know all of it, but still we have to make choices. Choices that can benefit what needs to be done to safeguard our homeland. The U.S. government will use all powers at its disposal to prevent, slow, or mitigate the spread of the emerging infectious disease threat by 1. Limiting spread of disease. 2. Mitigating the impact of illness, suffering, and death. And 3. Sustaining critical infrastructure and key resources in the United States. The NSC will serve as an information conduit for the Executive Office of the President and will coordinate interagency policy discussions and decisions. While states hold significant power and responsibility related to public health response outside of the declared public health emergency, the American people will look to the U.S. government for actions when multi-state or other significant public health events occur. An emerging infectious disease threat could be the result of natural emergence, accident, or international act of terrorism. An early federal response may include efforts to discern the cause and take appropriate action if the pathogen is found out to have not emerged from nature. So that's the importance of the federal response in these situations, because they can discern, not the states, can discern why is this happening, because the states are there to make sure that they're taking care of their states, right? Making sure that they're ready to go. But if it's a multi-state thing, that everything is happening to everyone at the same time by a single threat, the federal government is there to encompass its help to make sure that everybody is going to be taken care of and protected. That's the purpose. That's their purpose. That is their purpose, to protect everyone. Now, we got here on page 68, which is the concept of operations for a domestic response. The response to infectious disease outbreaks are primarily managed and monitored by the public health agencies at the state, local, territorial level of government. As incidents change in size, scope, and complexity, a higher level of coordination between public health, emergency management, and law enforcement communities may be required in the form of supplement and complementary support. The public health agency at the local state level should be deemed as the lead response agency, with HHS as the default LFA and originator of the federal agency-to-agency operational support tasks during any biological incident. Many conceivable instances will not result in a Stratford Act declaration, yet additional resources and coordination support may be facilitated by FEMA to deliver supplemental support to the lead public health agencies. Depending on the situation and in rare instances, other federal agencies may play a lead coordinating role, with HHS retaining its lead functional responsibilities to deliver public health and media capabilities. Now, this here are the phases of what happens during a situation before it occurs. Now, phase 1, which is primarily pre-incident, 1A is a standard for everything, which is normal operation. No problems, no hiccups, no nothing. Now, 1B, which is increased likelihood or elevated threat. 1C is near certainty of a credible threat. And then if it advances, we go to phase 2. Phase 2 begins when an incident occurs upon notification. 2A, activation, situational assessments and movement. 2B, employment of resources and stabilization. 2C, intermediate operations. And then phase 3, sustainable operations. For 3A, long-term recovery operations. Okay? So those are the steps and the levels. Okay? Now we're going to look at what triggers these events. As always, normal operation, no specific threat. Elevated threat, identification of human cases of high consequence emerging infectious disease anywhere now. Anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be inside. Anywhere in the world should trigger a response of somehow. And this is the identification of a human case of a pathogen of pandemic potential. When we get to a credible threat, triggering event is the confirmation of multiple human cases of a PPP anywhere, and or determination of a significant potential for public health emergency. And then we got the confirmation of multiple human cases. When you get into phase 2, because things are advancing, 2A is the initial response activation, situational assessment, and movement, which now is a demonstration of efficient and sustained human-to-human transmission of a novel virus anywhere. And then we have the declaration of a public health emergency. Then we got, for epidemiological indicators, demonstration of efficient and sustained human-to-human transmission. Then we go to 2B, employment of resources and stabilization, which is increasing the number of cases in the U.S. or a healthcare system burden that exceeds state resources. And then we have our state and local requests for assistance. And then finally, on 2C, we have the intermediate operations, which cases include continue to climb with long-term service disruptions and critical infrastructure impacts. But then we have the Presidential Staffer Act declaration, and then continue with the state local request for assistance. So, the events here will pretty much focus in on how we respond to these situations and what we can do to fix them and protect the country. That is what this is all about. The things we have to do to protect the Americans, to protect us, for the government to protect you, all of you. Now, we're going to go back to page 8, and we're going to review pathogens of pandemic potential involved in incidents, okay? A newly emerging infectious disease pathogen may represent a high consequence threat to human health, which at first may be unknown. For instance, influenza poses as a constant threat for emergence into an epidemic or pandemic. Other pathogens have also recently emerged with little or no warning, such as severe acute respiratory syndrome, as SARS, which was first reported on February 2003 and quickly spread to more than 20 countries before it was contained. Determining the primary mode of transmission is critical during early stages of the emergency infectious disease threat response. However, this information may not be readily available, and initial estimates are likely to be based on limited or incomplete information and will be continually assessed based on new information. So, activating what we need to activate to make sure that we got the resources, right? To see, making sure that we are doing what we can to work this situation. This keeps us focused. This would have kept us focused. That is what the purpose of this handbook is, this playbook is. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to look at key questions that will help focus in on what should be done, okay, to keep us thinking, to keep us talking, and keep us going at it. So under 1B, which is when something has happened, these are just some of the questions. I'm not going to read through all of them, but just a few of them, okay? And some of the question is does the state, local, territorial, or tribal jurisdiction have internal or external communication strategies and capabilities to effectively implement public service messaging? Does the SLTT jurisdiction have diagnostic capabilities and capacity sufficient to trace and monitor an outbreak? Does the SLTT jurisdiction have in place the plans, capability, and capacity to implement MCM and MPI sufficient to prevent an outbreak? Again, questions asked, so that we can prepare, which calls for communication with the states. All right, making sure that they're on point, and to see if there's anything that the federal government can do to help them. Okay. If we get to 1C, right, on the confirmation of multiple cases, what do we ask? What is the rate of transmission and projection of a number of cases? Is the disease exhibiting different characteristics in terms of rate transmission, clinical severity? Is appropriate active surveillance underway, and what is our level of confidence in the case detection rate? Are there immediate risks to the public that must be addressed, or immediate action that must take place to contain the cases? Things to keep us focused, things to make sure that we're asking the right things, doing the right things on the right path to protect America. 34, it states under government assistance, has a disaster declaration been considered? If not, what are the triggers? What will make it so that we need to do this, that we need to trigger these things? Is there a need to coordinate response beyond local capability? Is there a need for a united coordination group? And if so, at what level and where to physically locate it? The states are not alone in this. The idea that governors, you're on your own, that should never have been a factor in this. We all must work together to keep this from spreading. That should be the goal. Whatever resources somebody may need, we need to make sure they have it. That's what the government is supposed to do. That's what the federal government is supposed to be having done all the time. 35. Determine reporting structure and frequency of situational reports. Determine the need for coordination of federal advanced assistance. Establish a formal structure of the UCG once determination is made to stand up, or what the triggers will be to stand one up. Determine funding resources for a response. What are the funding operations? States will need money to help do this. It shouldn't be a political thing. It should be how much we need to put in to invest to make sure that they are able to do what they need to do to take care of a situation. Consider implementation of a travel restriction or border controls. Consider potential of changes in travel, health advisory assistance. Monitoring the flux of people coming in and out from areas that are affected. Yeah, we can tell them not to go, but are we making sure we're checking in on those who are coming in, no matter when? Because once we realize something is out there, are we looking in the right places? So, there are other questions, but that just shows you some of the information that they go through in order to make their decisions and how important that is. Now this here is the dashboard I compiled. This dashboard will collect the information that I explained to you before. We got the WHO, we have Dr. Bright's whistleblower complaint, we have the New York Times, we have the MSNBC, and we have the Trump administration's decisive action to combat the coronavirus. And then we have the possible pandemic response options. Now, we're starting at December 30th. Nothing's going on. Everything is right in the world. And like before I said, we reviewed a couple of things before this happened that really should have been taken into consideration, but because there is no actual threat at that moment defined, we're going to start with the 30th. So now we go to the next day, the 31st. What happens? Well, according to Dr. Bright, in late December 2019, Dr. Bright and other public health officials began taking note when a respiratory virus broke out in Wuhan, China. The WHO's country office in the People's Republic of China picked up a media statement by the Wuhan Municipal Health Commission from their website on cases of viral pneumonia in Wuhan, the People's Republic of China. Now, according to the New York Times, Chinese authorities treated dozens of cases of pneumonia of an unknown cause. MSNBC, the Associated Press, becomes one of the first English language news accounts to report China is investigating an outbreak of respiratory illness in the central city of Wuhan. Now, the Trump administration's decisive actions to combat the coronavirus on December 31st, China reports the discovery of a coronavirus to the World Health Organization. Now, if we were running this according to the pandemic response options, well, we will make a call, right? We would have our China professional on infectious disease in China, and they would already be working on the problem. They will be the lead, and then they will report back to the pandemic response team back at the White House. That is what they would be doing. Now, we get to January 1st, New Year's Day. This time, the WHO requested information on the reported cluster of atypical pneumonia cases in Wuhan from the Chinese authorities. The WHO activated its incident management support team as part of its emergency response framework, which ensures coordination of activities and response across the 3 levels of the World Health Organization, headquarters, regional, and country, for public health emergencies. Now, no other information on any of the timelines, but if we're following the pandemic playbook, the CDC expert in China would have still been working on this situation and still communicating with the White House pandemic response team. Now, on the 3rd, the WHO, Chinese officials provided information to the WHO on the cluster of cases of viral pneumonia of unknown causes identified in Wuhan. Now, the decisive action the Trump administration did, Director Robert Redfield sent an email to the director of the Chinese CDC, George Gao, formally offering to send U.S. experts to China to investigate the coronavirus. That's what they did. If we were following the playbook, we've already would have had somebody in China who was getting information on this, and then communicating back to the pandemic response team, which is coordinating with the CDC, so the CDC will already be getting information. So we sent off an email. Okay, I'm wondering if it was marked important with the red exclamation point. We don't know. The 4th, WHO tweeted that there was a cluster of pneumonia cases with no deaths in Wuhan, Hubei Province, People's Republic of China, and that investigations to identify the cause were underway. Okay, that's what the WHO did. Trump administration, nothing recorded, no timeline between the newspapers, but if we had somebody in China, they would have been working on it still, right? A couple of days in, they're still getting information, trying to get answers to questions, and then communicating it back to the White House and then to the CDC, and everybody is in the loop. On the 5th, nothing else happening except the Trump administration's decisive action to combat the coronavirus. CDC Director Renfield sent another email to Chinese CDC Director George Gao, formally again offering to send U.S. experts to China to investigate the coronavirus. Still, if we're following the playbook, the China-based CDC staff member would still be working on it, still communicating. There could have been some information already communicated, and then if there was some difficulty in getting information, the White House could be applying pressure. Hey, what's going on here? What are we doing with this? What's happening? What can we do to help you keep that over there? Because we don't want it to spread. So the pressure could be then that. But I did have a thought though, before we continue. When he started dismantling this stuff, especially with China, I'm wondering, could this have been part of the negotiation for the trade deal? Could China have said that we want you to remove the CDC expert from Wuhan or in China, and then Trump complied to that? Could that have been a thing? I don't know. We don't know. But for a man who says he negotiates, could that have been one of the things that he could have done? We don't know. We don't know. But let's go to the 6th. The WHO shared detailed information about a cluster of cases of pneumonia of unknown causes through the IHR Event Information System, which is accessible to all member states. The U.S. was part of that as well. The event notice provided information on the cases and advises member states to take precautions to reduce the risk of an acute respiratory infection. So, acute respiratory infection, something you inhale, right? Something in the lungs, something that you inhale through the air, right? So, MSNBC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention warns Americans to take precautions if traveling to China. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, issue a travel notice to Wuhan, China, for Wuhan, China, due to the spreading of the coronavirus. Now, if we're following the playbook, this could have been a situation where we reached out to the airline carriers, right, and asked them to reach out to their customers and inquire that, if they've traveled internationally from China or around there, that if they felt sick, have they been in China in these areas, and then still have them report to the state's Center for Disease Control, so that they can get this information, so they can look out and see, if there are any infections here in America. But right now at this point, all we're worrying about or looking at is if anybody have any symptoms and stuff like that. And still, continual communication from the China-based expert on exactly what's going on, right? And looking at the way to reduce the risk of a respiratory infection. Could this have been when we're looking for masks at this time? This is on January 6th. How do you block off? Doctors in operating rooms always wear masks, right? So that they won't exhale anything or block things from being inhaled. Stuff to consider. That's what they said. Take precautions to reduce the risk of acute respiratory infection. On the 7th, MSNBC, the CDC's Emergency Operations Center activates the COVID-19 Incident Management System used to detect direct operations, deliver resources, and share information. That sounds positive, right? The CDC established a coronavirus incident, which is a Trump decisive action. The CDC established a coronavirus incident management system to better share the response of the information about the virus. All right? But if we were writing the playbook, we would probably already have that information in hand, because our China-based expert was already getting the information and funneling it through the White House into the CDC, and everybody will already be in the loop. And we're also looking at the fact on what we need to do to prevent the spread of this respiratory infection. Again, could be masks, right? Could be. On the 8th, Dr. Bright, the CDC issued an official health advisory on January 8th. Timeline on MSNBC. The CDC issued an alert about the coronavirus, saying that it is closely monitoring the disease and that there are no known U.S. cases, which is all good. All good. Now, pandemic. What if reaching out to the what if we're still reaching out to the airline carriers, right? Getting their information. We're still following up. We're still doing things. We're still having activity going on and trying to resolve and trying to look into this. Still looking into reduce the risk of a respiratory infection. Maybe mask. It's coming up there, right? It's starting to look like that maybe that's something that we should have been doing. On the 9th, WHO reported that Chinese authorities had determined that the outbreak is caused by a novel coronavirus. Right? Trump's action on that day, they did a campaign rally. If we were still following the playbook, we could have still been working on that. We would have got the inside information on it, funnel that through so that we know what we're looking at back home. Information. On the 10th, WHO, the Global Coordination Mechanism for Research and Development to Prevent and Respond to Epidemics, held its first teleconference on the novel coronavirus, as did the Scientific Advisory Group of the Research and Development Blueprint, a global strategy and preparedness plan that allows the rapid activation of research development activities during epidemics. Now, Bright also began urgently pressing HHS officials to provide necessary resources to begin vaccine drug diagnostic development to combat the COVID-19. HHS leadership criticized him for his efforts and removed him from the meetings moving forward. Now, the WHO reports, Director General spoke to the head of the National Health Commission of the People's Republic of China. He also had a call to share information with the director of the Chinese Center for the Disease Control and Prevention. Still, if we're running the playbook, we would have had people over there already. We're still looking into the information, and we're still trying to coordinate to see if there's anything we can do to prevent the risk of a respiratory infection. We're still looking at it. Mask. A thought. Defense Production Act, maybe, right? It's on the 10th. On the 11th, novel coronavirus prevention update. The mode of transmission of the COVID are currently unknown. Available information suggests that the COVID is zoonotic and causes infections in humans through contact with infected animals, to be confirmed. Current data suggests that there is no or limited human-to-human transmission. For other coronavirus such as MERS and SARS, human-to-human transmission occurred due to breaches in IPC practices. Thus, the central focus of any prevention control strategy is protecting healthcare workers with appropriate IPC supplies and ensuring basic health logistics at responding facilities. So, here we have China's reported its first death. WHO tweeted that it had received the genetic sequences for the novel coronavirus from the People's Republic of China and expected these to soon be made publicly available. Trump decisive action. The CDC issued a level 1 travel health notice for Wuhan, China. Now, still, if we're running the playbook, reaching out to the airline carriers, still trying to communicate with those who've already traveled, and we're monitoring that, right? Still, more follow-up with a China-based CDC staff member, working the playbook, review protective equipment supplies for healthcare workers on the WHO's recommendations. So they never, this is what they were saying, right? That's what she was saying, that they wasn't notifying us of situations, right? Well, if we took their advice, we could have already been looking at this to make sure that healthcare workers, we ramped up personal protective equipment, and then maybe this is something we could have used the Defense Production Act on to get this up and running. Because if you make it, you can store it and be prepared for it. On the 12th, the WHO convened its first teleconference with the Diagnostic and Laboratories of Global Expert Network. Dr. Bright, on January 12th, the first novel coronavirus case was reported outside of China and Thailand, raising levels of concern. Now, the world is at 59 cases with that one death. Still, no cases in the U.S., but we're still looking at information and trying to do what we can to protect the people of the United States. Still working the problem to make sure that there's a resolution, that nothing is happening here, and still following up with people who've already traveled at this time. Something that we could have looked at. The 13th, 60 cases now, one death still. WHO statement on the novel coronavirus in Thailand. WHO is working with officials in Thailand and China following reports of confirmation of the novel coronavirus in a person in Thailand. The person was a traveler from Wuhan, China, and was identified by Thai officials on January 8th and hospitalized that day. The person is recovering from the illness, according to the Thai officials. Now, we're still working the problem. No other information from any other timelines, but we're still working the problem if we're following the Pandemic Playbook. On the 14th, Dr. Bright, Policy Coordination Committee meeting on January 14th to discuss development associated with the novel coronavirus circulating around Southeast Asia. In response, Dr. Bright proposed an urgent agenda item for the meeting. We need to get virus samples to the USG colleagues ASAP. Sequencing alone insufficient for potential MSC development and assessment for national security. We need to do more. Now, the WHO held a press briefing during which it stated that based on experience with respiratory pathogens, the potential for human-to-human transmission in 41 confirmed cases in the People's Republic of China exists. It exists. Okay? It is certainly possible that there is limited human-to-human transmission. Now, the headline here, the World Health Organization issued a statement about the first COVID-19 case outside of China, saying there is no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission, which is sort of misleading because they took limited and put no clear evidence when there's possibility of evidence, right? So, not a good thing. Trump administration, decisive action, they had a campaign rally. Now, but instead, what if the president met with CDC and national security, right, and took all the information up on this? Because now if there's limited human-to-human transmission, we really need to think about what we've been following up on if we're following this. And then to help those healthcare workers, we need to make sure that they are protected, to make sure that these things are up and running. Because once we get in the middle of this, those supplies will start going. So Defense Production Act could have been activated at this time to get those resources going. On the 15th of January, 61 cases, total of 2 deaths. Dr. Bright. Now, this took place over the next several days. Dr. Bright met with ASPR and BARDA staff to discuss the outbreak and to review international reports regarding its spread. He repeatedly asked HHS leadership to move quickly, hire more personnel, secure funding, obtain viruses to get started on medical countermeasures, focusing all of his attention, but they're focusing most of all of their attention on resources on repatriating people from China and then from cruise ships with passengers infected with the coronavirus. So they're distracted with the boat, but they're, forgetting everything else. And still, what if the president now at this time met with House and Senate leaders on looking at the situation and letting them know what the deal is at this time, right? Hey, we got this coming up. I know you guys are going to look to impeach me in the Senate, but this is what we're looking at, so we need to keep this in the back burner. 16. 61 still and 2 deaths. So Dr. Bright, over the next several days still, he's working these issues because they still got the boat to deal with. Now the WHO, the Chinese Ministry of Health and Labor and Welfare, informed WHO of the confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus in a person who traveled to Wuhan. That this was the second confirmed case detected outside of the People's Republic of China, who stated that considering global travel patterns additional cases in other countries were likely. Still, we got more. The Pan American Health Organization issued its first epidemiological alert on the novel coronavirus. The alert included recommendations covering international travelers, infection prevention and control measures, and laboratory testing. Still, at this point, the impeachment trial started, but still, the president could convene a meeting with the governors and discuss how prepared they are at this time, PPE, and ask them to review their response capabilities and testing capabilities. And still, they could have been on the loop all along, because if you're communicating with the health departments, they're going to talk to the governor and say, hey, listen, this is what we got going on. And all of this could have already been work in progress. 17th, again, Dr. Bright still working the problem on his end. WHO convened the first meeting of the analysis and modeling working group for the novel coronavirus. MSNBC, the CDC holds its first COVID-19 telebriefing. Officials say that the agency will start screening passengers on direct or connecting flights from Wuhan. However, they said they are not aware of measures regarding exit screening in Wuhan. Still, Trump's decisive actions to combat the coronavirus, the CDC began implementing public health entry screenings at 3 U.S. airports that received the most travelers from Wuhan, San Francisco, New York, JFK, and Los Angeles. Now, if they got notice of a transmission outside of Wuhan, Wuhan should not have been the only place they looked at, because all this time they could have been tracking people that were traveling since this first broke out in making sure track and trace was in effect. And still following up, still meet with governors on what their needs and trying to assess their needs and stuff. You know, not treating this as nothing is happening, but actually engaging in action. Because Dr. Bright, he's working his tail off trying to call everyone and making sure that they can do what they got to do to be prepared for this. Because he's seeing it. He is seeing it. On the 18th, we're up to 83 cases, still 2 deaths. On January 18th, Dr. Bright pushed Dr. Kiliak and his ASPR policy group to coordinate senior level meetings called Disaster Leadership Group, means to coordinate planning activities across the government for the emerging COVID outbreak. In previous outbreaks such as Ebola, Zika, and influenza, the DLG played a central role in coordinating intergovernment efforts to align on basic science and response activities. Dr. Kiliak initially rejected Dr. Bright's request to convene the DLG, noting, "Don't know if we, HHS, has outstanding policy issues to solve." Well, in light of the fact that this thing is coming down, I think that's something that they should have been reacting to. Now, nothing else happening because there's the impeachment trial, but Trump went golfing. Now, if we're following the playbook, we're continuing to make sure we get information. We're starting to look to try to see if we can get testing done, working with the airlines, people that are traveling in from Europe, okay? Still reviewing the needs of the governors in their states. On January 19th, we're up now to 219 cases and 3 deaths. It's growing. The WHO Western Pacific Regional Office tweeted that according to the latest information received in WHO analysis, there was evidence of limited human-to-human transmission. Still, what Trump's doing, he's golfing. If we're following the response according to the playbook, we're still working with China. We're still reviewing testing protocols. We're still doing something in order to combat this, to make sure that we're not affected. We're still in touch with people who have coming in from transit in China, because we're working the work. We're working the people, because it's manageable. It's manageable still. Stuff to follow up on. Now, things changed on January 20th. January 20th, We're at 239 cases worldwide, 3 deaths worldwide. Now we're up to 1 case in the US. Now, that 1 case, just for perspective, if you see an ant in your house, right? Do you actually believe that if you kill that 1 ant, you don't have to worry about the ant? I don't think so. If you see 1 ant, you have to know and assume that there are more in the house. That 1 isn't the only one. But on January 20th, 2020, the WHO held an emergency call attended by many HS officials, during which it advised that the outbreak is a big problem. After the call, Dr. Bright and his team discussed the need to make HHS leadership aware of the urgent necessity of funding to combat the virus by email dated January 20th. Dr. Robert Johnson, Director of BARDA's Division of Influenza and Emerging Infectious Disease at Dr. Bright, is the ASPR, and hopefully through him, the S1 Secretary Azar, aware of just how BARDA's hands are tied due to the lack of EID funding and the precious time being lost. We could have been working on this all along if they just listened to him. Now, in the New York Times, other countries, including the United States, confirmed cases. Other WHO information: WHO published guidance on home care for patients with suspected infections. WHO conducted the first mission to Wuhan to meet with public health officials to learn about the response to the cluster of virus cases of novel coronavirus. Decisive action by the Trump administration. Dr. Fauci announced the National Institute of Health is already working on the development of a vaccine for the virus. Now, you're looking at a vaccine because you're anticipating people getting infected. Being that it's a respiratory virus, you're working at the end instead of trying to work at the front. So if you're trying to prevent spread, what are the factors that you could have been doing to prevent the spread? Right? Mask? Could be, right? Mask? Just thought. Still, if you're following the playbook, you're still working the problem and still making an effort to make sure you're taking care of the situation. Now, January 21st, 2020. Mike Bowen, co-owner and executive vice president of domestic surgical mask producer Prestige Ameritech, emailed Dr. Bright to inform him that the Department of Homeland Security had contacted him about procuring masks. Wow. So, a US-based agency reached out to Dr. Bright via email to say, hey, listen, I'm here to help. I need to know, what do you want me to do so as to help? Okay? I'm going to need some capital so I can do what I got to do to help make more masks, because there's a problem. Now, WHO, WPRO tweeted that it was now very clear from the latest information that there was at least some human-to-human transmission, and the infections among healthcare workers strengthened the evidence for this. Okay? MSNBC, the first case of the coronavirus in the U.S. is confirmed in a patient near Seattle. Decisive action by the Trump administration. The CDC activated its Emergency Operations Center to provide ongoing support to the coronavirus response. And still, pandemic response options, making sure information from China continues to work the problem, testing protocols, work to see if passengers, you're following up, you're reviewing the governors on what they got, reviewing protective equipment. You still could be ramping up this. Defense Production Act. Could this have happened? Could we have used it, right? 534 cases on the 22nd. Still only 1 case, but worldwide we still got 17 deaths. Dr. Bright, in an email to Dr. Bright the following day, Mr. Bowen again offered to support the government in procuring masks. He explained that Prestige Air Maritech has 4 N95 manufacturing lines that are currently not operational but could be reactivated. In a dire situation and the government help, he concluded by email by telling Dr. Bright, I hope that you're in my predictions about this foreign-made U.S. mask supply didn't come true. Dr. Bright understood that the nation would need more masks, and Mr. Bowen offered the means of productions from the country's largest mask manufacturer. He responded that afternoon to thank Dr. Bowen for his offer. He explained that he had to forward Mr. Bowen's information to the ASPR critical infrastructure team the day before and hoped someone would reach out to him. Right? So, people are in place to work, to do things. WHO's mission to Wuhan issued a statement saying that evidence suggests human-to-human transmission in Wuhan, but the more investigation is needed to understand the full extent of the transmission. Okay? While the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, President Trump is asked whether he has a plan to contain the coronavirus in the U.S. Trump responded by saying that the U.S. does have a plan and that he thinks that it's going to be handled very well. He also said that he thinks China is in a very good shape. Okay? Okay, so you would like to think that, right? But Dr. Bright has issues on getting things looked at and getting things done. Still, decisive action by the Trump administration. Trump said it. We have it under control. It's going to be fine. Still, could we have met with House and Senate leaders to continue to brief on the progress, any fiscal concerns, testing protocols to use to begin testing in the United States? Still, masks, PPEs, Defense Production Acts, right? 23rd, Dr. Kediak finally convened a DLG meeting. During the meeting, Dr. Bright emphasized BARDA's urgent need for virus samples and a major infusion of funds to develop diagnostic drugs and vaccine. He also expressed concerns about the shortage of N95 masks, which he currently anticipates would cause a healthcare crisis among first responders and healthcare providers. Disturbingly, Dr. Kediak plowed through the abbreviated meeting, addressing topics in a perfunctory manner and paying short shift to the concerns that Dr. Bright raised. Now, according to the New York Times, Wuhan, a city of more than 11 million, was cut off by the Japanese authorities. So the entire city was cut off. Trump's decision, the CDC sought a special emergency authorization from the FDA to allow states to use its newly developed coronavirus testing kits. Okay. Now, a possibility: enact the Defense Production Act and wrap up production of supplies needed PPEs with various companies, right? Could have been making masks, making sure we take an investment, because we're looking at trying to figure out who has it still, right? With the tests. But then there were problems with them, right? What are we going to do? But we're still not looking out, making sure that it's not spreading anymore. So, could masks be an issue that could help with? Could have. Could have. The 24th. Still. 897 cases around the world. 26. We're still at 1 on the 24th. And still. On January 23rd, 24th, 25th, Dr. Bowen from Prestige Ameritech repeatedly emailed Dr. Bright and Dr. Wolf to sound the alarm yet again about the mass shortages. HHS failed to act yet again to address this impending emergency. The WHO, France informed WHO of 3 cases of novel coronavirus, all of whom had traveled to Wuhan. These were the first confirmed cases in the WHO Europe region. It's spreading. The director of the Pan-American Health Organization urged countries in the Americas to be prepared to detect, early, isolate, and care for patients infected with the new coronavirus in case of receiving travelers from countries where there was ongoing transmission of a novel coronavirus cases. The director spoke at the PAHO briefing for ambassadors of the Americas to the Organization of American States in Washington. Still, the impeachment trial is going on. Still, we still have mitigation guidelines, enacted Defense Production Act to ramp up production of supplies needed by PPEs with various companies. Still looking to do something, but we're growing. We're growing. On the 25th, we're up to 1,300 cases, 40 deaths, 2 in the U.S. But the WHO Regional Director of Europe issued a public statement outlining the importance of being ready at the local and national levels for detecting cases, testing samples, and clinical management. Bright on January 25th, Mr. Bowen wrote Dr. Bright to Dr. Wolf that his company was getting a lot of requests from China, Hong Kong. He then explained that nearly 50% of the masks in the United States are imported from Chinese manufacturers, and if the supply stops, U.S. hospitals will run out of masks. No way to prevent it. Still, Dr. Bright forwarded Dr. Bowen's email to CIP Supply Chain, Dr. Wolf, Dr. Falco, Dr. Adams, with a note that the mass situation seems to be of concern, and we have been receiving warnings for over a week. Dr. Bright told the team that it was important to keep this at the top of the heap of various issues. As other countries were vying for the United States for mass supplies, Dr. Bright continued to put pressure on HHS leadership to take action to no avail. Still, if we're following the pandemic response, things could have been happening. Things could have been moving. 26th, nothing happening. Discuss mitigation guidelines. We're still working the problem if we're following the playbook. Now, 27th. The WHO Regional Director of Southeast Asia issued a press release that urged countries in the region to focus on their readiness for the rapid detection of imported cases and prevention of further spread. Okay? Action by the Trump administration. President Trump tweeted that he made an offer to President Xi Jinping to send experts to China to investigate the coronavirus outbreak. The CDC issued a level 3 travel alert, health notice, urging Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China due to the coronavirus. The White House Coronavirus Task Force started meeting to help monitor and contain the spread of the virus and provide updates to the president. By this time, we've already, if we follow the playbook, we'd have already had people in China. We've already been communication. Information that they're now looking for would have already been in hand because we would have had pressure given to the Chinese government back then. Worldwide, on the 27th, 2,800 cases, 5 in the United States, 81 deaths around the world. 28, 4,500 at this point, with 106 deaths, still only 5 here in the United States. WHO China leaders discussed next steps in battling against the coronavirus outbreak. The National Health Commission presented China's strong public health capabilities and resources to respond and manage respiratory disease outbreak. The discussions focused on continued collaboration on containment measures in Wuhan, public health measures in other cities and provinces, conducting further studies on the severity and transmissibility of the virus, continuing to share data, and for China to share biological material with WHO. These measures will advance scientific understanding of the virus and contribute to the development of the medical countermeasures such as vaccines and treatments. Still, the impeachment trial is going on. Still, if we're following the playbook, we would have been actively doing things to make sure that people are safe. Doing it to prevent. Action would have been happening if we were following this playbook. The 29th. 6,000 cases, 132 deaths, still only 5 in the U.S. As you can see by the board now, it's getting pretty busy now. Dr. Bright, according to a account in Wall Street Journal on January 29th, 8 days after the U.S. announced its first case, Secretary Azar told President Trump that the coronavirus epidemic was under control and that the U.S. government had never mounted a better interagency response to the crisis. Now, really? With everything that Dr. Bright's been saying up until this point, that they're really responding really good to this? WHO, on his return to Switzerland from China, the Director General presented an update to member states of the response to the outbreak of the novel coronavirus infection in China at the 30th meeting of the Program, Budget, and Administration Committee of the Executive Board. He informed the PBAC that he had reconvened the Emergency Committee on the novel coronavirus under the IHR, which would meet the following day to advise on whether the outbreak constituted a PHEIC. Also, at this time, Peter Navarro's memos warning of mass coronavirus death circulated in January to late January. President Trump's economic advisor, Peter Navarro, warned his White House colleagues that the novel coronavirus could take more than 500,000 American lives and cost at least $6 trillion, according to the memos obtained by Axios at the time. Still, the decisive action by the Trump administration, the White House announced the formation of the Coronavirus Task Force to help monitor and contain the spread of the virus and provide updates to the president. Still, up until now, if we were following the playbook, we would have been working the problem and not looking to just start doing it now. We're almost a month into this. And then WHO published advice on the use of masks in the community during home care and healthcare settings. The Pandemic Supply Chain Network, created by the WHO in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, held its first meeting. The mission of the PSCN is to create and manage a market network allowing the WHO and private sector partners to access any supply chain functionality and assess an asset from end to end anywhere in the world at any scale. So the WHO is looking for a unified coordinating effort to try to get supplies to other countries to hold to present this, right? Still, if we were following the playbook, we would have been doing this in home. Something should have been happening. We could have been working on the problem, but not, right? Not. But we could have been doing it. And as you can see, Peter Navarro's memos, he was saying that there is something wrong that we need to be done. He was saying this. And you would think that if he was talking, maybe that should have triggered something to say, maybe we should be doing something with this. Now, Dr. Bright, on January 29th, 2020, Dr. Falcone said another update to Dr. Kiliak, Dr. Bright, Dr. Sumi, and others regarding indefinite medical supply chain focus area. Identified medical chain supply focus area, which include N95 and surgical masks, and certain and concerns and additional analysis, which included the predominantly foreign production mask. Dr. Falcone's email did not list any action items, and despite weeks of warnings from Dr. Bright, industry leaders, and international media, her office was still not yet taking any action to procure masks. 2 days later, Mr. Bowen of Prestige Ameritech sent yet another email to Dr. Bright and Dr. Wolf, once again issuing a dire warning about the imminent mask shortages. Among other things, he advised, this week, we sent 1 million masks to China and Hong Kong. He continued, in all my years of predicting U.S. mask supply, in all my years of predicting the U.S. mask supply would one day collapse, I never pictured myself selling masks to China. I have it from 2 reliable sources that China has begun telling Chinese mask makers not to let masks leave China. So he concluded, I think China will cut off masks to the U.S. And if so, U.S. hospitals are going to have a very rough time, as up to half of the supply is made in China. So, a problem is brewing. A supply here in the U.S., our reliability on supplies from China in regards to masks was looking to stop. So what would that do? We've had weeks to prepare for this. If we were following the Pandemic Playbook, we would have been working on this problem. We could have already started by this time looking to filter out stuff, sending stuff to the States by this time, because we would have been prepared. On the 30th, total cases at this point, 7,832 with 170 deaths. Still only 5 cases in the U.S. with no deaths. But the Director General declared that the novel coronavirus outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, WHO's highest level of alarm. Times, WHO declared global emergency. The MSNBC, the New York City Fire Department instructs 9/11 dispatchers on special procedures to follow if a caller presents coronavirus-like symptoms, including a fever and cough. Calls from New York. They're starting to build up. The decisive action from the Trump administration. President Trump discussed the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement at Dana Incorporated in Warren, Michigan. Now we're working very strongly with China on the coronavirus. That's a new thing that a lot of people are talking about. Hopefully, it won't be as bad as some people think it could be. Well, we're not doing anything over here, so what are the prospects of it that it will become bad? Still, if we're following the playbook, we're working the problem. The playbook would have kept us working the problem, right? We're working the problem. 31st. January 20th, 31st, 2020. WHO's regional director of Africa sent out guidance note to all countries in the region emphasizing the importance of readiness and early detection of cases. Trump administration restrict travel from China today. The Trump administration suspends entry into the United States by foreign nationals who traveled to China within the last 14 days, including Hong Kong and Macau. This does not apply to lawful U.S. citizens and family members, spouses of U.S. residents and citizens. AZAR declares a U.S. public health emergency of COVID-19. The declaration was retroactive to January 27. Decisive action. Declared a coronavirus a public health emergency. Announced Chinese travel restricted. Suspend entry into the United States for foreign nationals who pose a risk of transmitting the virus. The Department of Homeland Security took critical steps to funnel all flights from China into 7 domestic U.S. airports. And then now, if we were following the playbook, continue mitigation guidelines, enact the Defense Production Act, ramp up production of supplies needed PPEs with various companies, healthcare facilities, needed testing. All of these would have been being worked on if they were following the playbook. But it just now looks like they're starting to really believe that this may be a problem. We could have already been connecting with people. We're at phase 2A now. All right, we're red line here. So there's a lot to worry about at this time. February 1st. Princess Cruise confirmed that a passenger who sailed aboard the Diamond Princess from Yokohama, Japan on January 20th and disembarked in Hong Kong on January 25th had tested positive for the virus. Trump went golfing. Still, if we're working the playbook, we're still working the problem. Still working the problem. On February 1st, we're up to 11,000 cases, 7 in the U.S., 259 deaths around the world. February 2nd, first dispatch of the RT-PCR lab diagnosis kit shipped to WHO regional offices. First coronavirus death reported outside of China. Death outside of China, 40-year-old Wuhan resident died in the Philippines, outside. So he traveled from Wuhan, flew, probably infected other people on the plane, landed in the Philippines, and any connecting flights thereof. Still, on the 2nd, Trump said the CDC expanded enhanced entry screenings to the 8 major airports across the nation. President Trump, interviewed on Fox with Sean Hannity, said, well, we pretty much shut it down coming in from China. We've offered China help, but we can't have thousands of people coming in who may have this problem, the coronavirus. That's how he broke it down. That's what he sees. But if we're following the pandemic playbook, we would have been in action. We would have been doing things. The third, 17,000 cases now, 11 in the U.S., 362 deaths. WHO finalized its strategic preparedness and response plan centered on improving capacity and detected, prepare and respond to the outbreak. The SPRP translated what had been learned from the virus at that stage into strategic action to guide the development of the national and regional operational plan. Its content is structured around how rapidly establish international coordination, scale up country preparedness in response to operation, and accelerate research and innovation. Still, nothing going on. If we were following the playbook, we would have been working. On the third still, Mr. Bowen sent yet another dire warning about mask supply shortage and urged Dr. Bright and Dr. Wolf to speak with the New York Times reporter whom Bowen had contacted about this growing threat. He urged him to speak to the media to make the president aware of this little-known national security risk. If we let this opportunity go by, the U.S. mask supply will forever remain under foreign control. Trump reads the news. By February 4th, Dr. Bright did not speak with the reporter, but instead followed the chain of command and referred the matter to HHS communication team. By February 4th, the media was reporting the implemented global mask shortage. Unfortunately, the public exposure of this aspect of the impending health crisis did not cause HHS leadership to act. That week, noting that no other office was taking appropriate action, Dr. Bright directed BARDA to revise his budget to include expenses to ramp up domestic mask production. However, in the following weeks of the budget negotiation between BARDA and ASPR, it was determined that the budget for masks would be covered under the ASPR and SNS budget and removed from the BARDA budget requests. On the 4th, the WHO Director General asked the UN Security Council General to activate the UN Crisis Management Policy, which held its first meeting in 11 February. On the 4th, in the Wall Street Journal op-ed, two former senior U.S. officials called on the Trump administration to launch broader surveillance testing to find infected patients and isolate them, and urged the FDA to allow private labs to develop diagnostic kits. Chad Wolf, an acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, announced a decision to direct all flights to the United States carrying people who recently traveled to China to arrive in certain U.S. airports with enhanced screening procedures. How strategic is that? Those airports, international airports, primarily are all in Democratic-run states, right? What are the forethought on that? What is the forethought on intentionally sending people that may be infected into those cities for screening with the possibility of spreading? Could that have been it? Decisive action. President Trump vowed in his State of the Union address to take all necessary steps to protect the Americans from the coronavirus. If we were following the pandemic response, we would have been actively working the problem with PPEs and protection equipment and other things. If only we were doing that, because as of the 4th of February, we were up to 20,000 people, 427 deaths, 11 cases in the United States. During late January, early February, Dr. Bright also launched a comprehensive review of existing drugs that have been developed for MERS, SARS, Ebola, and other viruses to urgently determine if they might already be a drug available or in late-stage development that could work against the novel coronavirus. Dr. Bright had BARDA create a landscape chart to show all possible vaccine, therapeutic, diagnostic candidates that might be effective in the treatment of the novel coronavirus. In addition, BARDA had made significant investments in various drug and vaccine platform technologies, common backbone and production system used to make vaccines and treatments for other viral threats that would be leveraged to move faster to develop a treatment or vaccine for the novel coronavirus. Dr. Bright had his team chart and prioritize these platforms for rapid assessment of their potential to use in the outbreak. In addition, Dr. Bright directed his team to review all existing contracts and agreements to assess which agreements could be quickly refocused to address the novel coronavirus. This strategy had been put in place by BARDA over at least 5 years to respond quickly to emerging infection disease. Under Dr. Bright's action, BARDA was executing its long-standing strategic plan for a rapid response to an emerging virus. On the 5th, WHO headquarters began holding daily media briefings on the novel coronavirus. The first time the WHO has held daily briefings by the Director General or Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergencies Program. Cruise ship in Japan, quarantine 1,000. Impeachment trial, Trump's acquitted. The Trump administration and health officials briefed lawmakers on the federal government's coronavirus response efforts. Under the pandemic response, we would have been still working the problem. 24,000 cases by the 5th. The 6th, the WHO to accelerate research and innovation for new coronavirus. WHO is convening a global research innovation forum to mobilize international action in response to the new coronavirus. The first U.S. citizen diagnosed with coronavirus dies in China, the U.S. Embassy in Beijing said. The Trump administration decisive action. The CDC began shipping CDC-developed test kits for the 2019 novel coronavirus to the U.S. Still, we could have been working on these problems all along if we were following the development, the pandemic response playbook. We are now on February 7th. It will turn out that February 7th became a very pivotal time in all of this. Because there were things going on, that, we didn't really realize until later about the thought process for everything that's been happening. And we'll deal with that when we get to it. But first, let's concentrate on what we have here. So on February 7, 2020, the DLG meet and with Dr. Bright's urging, focused on the topic of masks and respirators. Dr. Bright and Dr. Anita Patel from the CDC reminded DLG members of previous FRMM reviews, models, and publications which cited a need for up to 3.5 billion N95 masks to respond to a pandemic. Dr. Bright reiterated that the United States had a significant shortage and raised concerns that the exportation of masks further depleted an already inadequate supply. He insisted that the federal government urgently needed to place orders to ramp up production of N95 masks in order to ensure that healthcare workers and first responders were adequately protected. Adequately protected. We needed to protect our first responders so that they can help all of us to fight this thing. But we needed to give our soldiers, right? Wartime president, right? We needed to protect our soldiers in the healthcare industry to be prepared to give them the tools so they can fight this thing. It's emerging. Worldwide, 31,000 people currently have it right now with 638 deaths around the world. We're up to 12 now. It's building. Now, on the New York Times, it cited that a Chinese doctor who tried to raise the alarm died. The guy who wanted to tell us back in China, who wanted to let the world know, died of this virus. Timeline for MSNBC. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announces a U.S. pledge of $100 million to help China and other countries combat the coronavirus. The pledge is also mentioned in the HHS press briefing with members of the coronavirus task force. So we're sending $100 million to help the world combat this, but we're having difficulty in getting what we need here in the States to fight it here at home, because like I said, it may be 12 that we're registering as confirmed cases. However, like I said with the ant, if you have one ant, there is likely and a lot more probability that there's more. Now, the Trump administration's decisive action here to combat it. President Trump told reporters that the CDC is working with China on the coronavirus. All well and good. All well and good, right? We're extending our help. But also, he's working on the trade agreement, right? So he has to show good faith in saying that we want to help China because he wants something else. So he's pretty much given that back and forth, right? But then, if we were following the pandemic guidelines, we would continue the mitigation, right? The efforts and stuff. We probably would have enacted the Defense Production Act, right? To ramp up production of supplies and needed PPEs with various companies for our healthcare workers and facilities, right? These things are needed. These things were needed. And these things could have been in place. But let's continue on, because the February 7th had a lot packed into it. Now, continuing with Dr. Bright's statement, this was critical to ensure their own safety and to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 in hospitals and other medical settings. As per supply chain leads pushed back, insisting that there was no indication of a supply chain shortage or of issues with masks, and therefore there was no need to take immediate action. So they were looking to downplay this. No, we don't need to do it. I mean, if you have something growing, manifesting, you don't wait till it becomes a monstrosity and act on it. If you see it bubbling, you try to turn it down. You try to stop it while you still can control it. So you need to put things into effect so as to keep it from growing. Now, Dr. Bright responded that the country was already seeing shortages in drugstores and online, and it was clear that there was going to be a dangerous shortage of masks as the virus continued to spread. Dr. Wolf and Dr. Falcon responded that the plan was to monitor for any supply chain issues, and if needed, ask the CDC to update its guidelines to tell people who didn't need masks to not buy them. So, the way you tackle this is to change guidance, right? Dr. Bright responded, I can't believe that you can sit there and say that with a straight face. Do you really believe that changing the CDC guideline to tell people not to wear masks will reduce the panic people would feel once this virus spread? He again emphasized the need to contact mask producers to place orders immediately. So, this was a tell. This was a means of insight to say that, well, we're not going to do things, so we'll just tell people not to expect things. You don't need a mask. Don't take masks because we want to make sure our healthcare workers have them. But the thing is that things go beyond healthcare workers, go beyond the population. So if you got a small supply, you have to increase the supply. You just can't pigeonhole it to say, oh, nobody else take it, but we just want to make sure our hospitals and frontline people get them. The rest of the country don't need to worry about that. How do you do that? How do you justify that and not take action to expand what needs to happen, to expand to the needs of others, to the people themselves. It continues. Fortunately, White House trade advisor Peter Navarro shared Dr. Bright's sense of urgency, recognized his expertise, and was prepared to help Dr. Bowen, who continued to raise concerns about the dire consequences of the mass shortages in the United States. Connected Mr. Navarro with Dr. Bright on February 5th, 2020. Mr. Bowen sent Dr. Bright an email marked high importance with the subject matter, "Prepare for a call from the White House." He stated, "I'm pretty sure that my mask supply message will be heard by President Trump this week. I'm getting a ton of press and saying that you're the guy who knows that I'm telling the truth. Thanks to the Trump insider reading yesterday's Wired.com article, the ball is screaming forward toward your court. I'm handing you the power to fix the U.S. mask supplies. Please do not let America down." Mr. Bowen continued, "I am also telling people that you and the former director of BARDA are exemplary public servants. I know that you're doing what's in your power. Please ask your associates to convey the gravity of this national security issue to the White House. I'm pretty sure you'll get the chance." Dr. Bright again followed the chain of command and made the Asper office was aware of Mr. Bowen's entreaty that day by email. The following day, the Wall Street Journal ran an article about the mass shortages, once again sounding alarm. And once again, HHS leadership failed to act. For that reason, on February 7th, Dr. Bright was greatly surprised and relieved to receive a call from Mr. Navarro's policy assistant, Joanna Miller, who was with Mr. Navarro in the White House Situation Room. Ms. Miller asked Dr. Bright to meet with Mr. Navarro and members of his staff the following day at the White House to brief them about the coronavirus response activities. Dr. Bright told Ms. Miller that he was eager to meet with Mr. Navarro, but required the approval of HHS leadership to attend the meeting. He then immediately contacted Dr. Kiliak to obtain authorization to attend. Dr. Kiliak informed Dr. Bright that he needed to discuss the request with Secretary Azar as the meeting time approached. Dr. Kiliak had still not responded to Dr. Bright's request to attend the meeting with Mr. Navarro. When Dr. Bright notified Mr. Navarro that he had not obtained clearance to attend the meeting, Mr. Navarro called both Dr. Kiliak and Brian Harrison, Secretary Azar's chief of staff, directly. A few minutes later, Dr. Kiliak emailed Dr. Bright, "You're cleared to attend. Thank you for advising." Even though Dr. Kiliak authorized Dr. Bright to attend the meeting, he was extremely uncomfortable that Dr. Bright had agreed to meet with Mr. Navarro. Dr. Bright later learned that Mr. Sui had sent Mrs. Miller 2 emails trying to dissuade Mr. Navarro from meeting with Dr. Bright. After Dr. Bright and Mr. Navarro met, Dr. Kiliak and other members of HHS leadership made disparaging remarks about Dr. Bright's interaction with Mr. Navarro and the White House. Now, here we go. The urgency of these masks is being put out there. We're having a shortage. We need to ramp up production, okay? We've committed resources to China, right? And to the world. But we're not allocating resources to the U.S. to help ourselves? Now, why could that be? Well, this is where the bottom fell out. Because of a book. A revelation that shatters the imagination on why certain things happen. Because in this book, the President of the United States admitted to the writer of this book on why he did what he did and what he knew. Because Trump admitted downplaying the coronavirus dangers in the early days of the pandemic. And this is what he said.
It's a very tricky situation. It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. You know, people don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know.
It's pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. You know, so this is deadly stuff.
So he knew the severity. The President of the United States knew the severity of this virus. And we already have recorded 12 cases in the country. So how is it that you know this, you know the severity, but you're downplaying exactly what needs to happen in order to prevent it or keep it from expanding? Well, it goes on from there, because there's more information that he revealed to the author of this book.
This thing is a killer if it gets you. If you're the wrong person, you don't have a chance.
Yes, exactly. And
like a friend of mine died, very great real estate developer from Manhattan. He died yesterday.
I know. I mean, listen, students of mine, I teach a journalism seminar, have written me, have had it, and one of the women said she had it. They said she was cured, and they kept coming back with new symptoms. Strange things happened. She had intense headaches.
What happened?
And she's in agony, and they're telling her, "Oh, you're cured now. You're over it." So this I mean, you said it. This is a monster. This is a scourge, and
it is the plague.
It is the plague, and
And Bob, it's so easily transmissible, you wouldn't even believe it.
I know.
I mean, you can be in the room. I was in the White House a couple of days ago, a meeting of 10 people in the Oval Office, and a guy sneezed innocently, not a horrible, just a sneeze. The entire room bailed out, okay, including me, by the way.
So, a man sneezed in his office during a meeting and scared everybody that they left the room. This is the disease, this is the virus we're dealing with. But you continually don't do certain things to ramp up the needed materials to help provide relief and give reassurances. It doesn't make sense. But it continues.
The question is going to be, we're going to look back and we're going to say, at the end of July, August, September, October, what happened with the virus? Did people want, we've talked about this, people want their president to succeed. Now, you're right, there's some people who don't.
No, I think you're wrong.
No,
people don't want me to succeed.
No, but if you succeed, they succeed.
Even the rhinos don't want me to succeed. They'll end up with a Supreme Court and lots of things that they're not going to be too happy with.
Yeah.
I have opposition like nobody has, and that's okay. But I've had that all my life. I've always had it. And this has been my whole life has been like this. In the meantime, right now, I'm looking at the White House, okay? I'm staring right at the walls of the White House.
Where are you?
In opposition all my life, Bob, more than most. And let's see how it all turns out. We got 105 days. Let's see how it all turns out. I think it's going to turn out.
Okay, today at 5 o'clock.
I was unlucky with the virus because it came in and
Sure,
whether it was me or anybody else.
But you got it. You got it. The country's got it. And the world's got it. But you're in charge of this country. And,
And we've done better than any other country, just about done better than any other country at handling it. And it's a bigger, more diverse, more difficult country. And we've done better than any, other than with the press. Other than with the press, I've done a great job. With the press, I can't do a good job because it's fake. It's fake news.
But
it's
what?
a fake group of people, and you know it, and you won't write it.
Okay, are you going to acknowledge that in the last 6-7 months you made some mistakes in judgment on the virus?
I'll see how it all turns out. Let's see how it all turns out. I took a big chance on vaccines. I upped the program. You wouldn't be looking at vaccines for 3 years. We're looking at them next week.
No, I understand.
No, what you don't understand. What I was able to do with the FDA and scheduling, a vaccine takes years before it ever even gets tested. We're testing vaccines for 3 weeks already.
Okay, you're in charge of the national interest and the national.
Will I get credit for it? Probably not, but I'll take the credit.
No, you are in charge of the. Look, I've learned one thing in 50 years in writing about 9 presidents. 9, including you, going back to Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Obama, you name it. And that is, presidents have power, extraordinary power, and people are leaning on you. And I'm saying from
my extraordinary power, but in my case, they never accepted it, and they never accepted this president because they're a bunch of dishonest people. And they spied on my campaign, and we caught them. They spied before and after I won, and we caught them, and we caught them cold. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, we're indeed going to see. Is there any lesson you take? Because I think this is so important. I have, I keep, because I'm in the business of trying to understand other people, I keep learning about how do you really understand people? How do I understand you? I mean, you and I...
You don't understand me. You don't understand me. But that's okay. You'll understand me after the election. But you don't understand me now.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. I don't think you get it. And
what are the questions I've not asked that have not been answered?
I think you've asked me a lot of very good questions, a lot of personal questions. I think you've asked me a lot of good stuff.
So, it turned out that he turned the situation about him, about his focus, about what he's doing, not what he could do for the people. Why would the president be thinking about that? Granted, he did not get the popular vote. He didn't. But the thing is that whomever sits in the chair in the White House behind the Resolute desk, the people of the country wants the president to succeed, because if the president succeeds in his agenda for the country, then the country succeeds. If he keep making it about him, about what people should be giving him, it's not going to, and that division grows. So you just got to keep asking yourself, why? Why? And then I think we finally got an answer.
Now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob. It's just today and yesterday some startling facts came out. It's not just old
yeah, exactly.
people, to plenty of young people.
So give me a moment of talking to somebody, going through this with Fauci or somebody who kind of, it caused a pivot in your mind, because it's clear just from what's on the public record that you went through a pivot on this to, oh my God, the gravity is almost inexplicable and unexplainable.
Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
Sure, I want you to
I
be.
wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
Playing it down so you don't create a panic. Playing it down so you don't create a panic. Why would that even be an option? Why not telling someone something that they could use the information to help prepare them for something that is coming? A doctor who has a patient who has cancer, you don't tell them that they have cancer because you don't want them to panic about it. You give information so that people can work to fix something, do what they can to protect themselves. The role of the government is to protect its people. You don't protect somebody by not telling them something that they need to know to help them, to protect them, to feel they have a choice in defending themselves. You don't want to cause a panic. And even the Republican chair said the same thing. And it just blew my mind away.
I disagree that the president took political calculations into a global pandemic like we've never seen before that has decimated not just our country, but countries across the world. The president was calm and steady and methodical. He canceled travel from China on January 31st. He created the coronavirus task force on February 9th. He created a plan to get the private sector engaged, to ramp up PPE, to get ventilators in place, to slow the spread, to ramp up testing. These are things you want from a president. Think of what would have happened if he'd have gone out and said, this is awful. We should all be afraid. We don't have a plan. It would have been a run on the banks. It would have been a run on the hospitals. It would have been a run on the grocery stores. As it was already hard to get some of the things we needed in the grocery stores. So the president was calm and steady in a time of unrest and uncertainty. And I think history will look back on him well as how he handled this pandemic.
How do you follow up with that? If you yell like she said you're going to yell, yeah, you're going to cause a panic. If you say it the way she said it, you're going to cause a panic. There is a way of doing this so that you don't cause a panic and you galvanize the nation to work together to do something. Now, I put something together that could have been an option, and I think it would help, and it could have done something to really pull the nation together. Now, it's just a workup, but I think if you look at it and listen to it, it just might have been something that could have been said or something like it to help to get people focused and realize that as a nation, we need to work together on this. So, it begins. Just imagine he's on the podium at the briefing room and he said this. Good afternoon. As you all aware, my administration has been monitoring the virus outbreak in Wuhan, China. I have directed the CDC, HHS, and the State Department to aggressively reach out to the Chinese government to get the needed information on how and why this happened. With the release of information from the World Health Organization on human-to-human transmission on January 20th, the CDC issued a Level 3 travel health notice urging Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China due to the coronavirus. Considering this, I have directed the CDC to reach out to airline carriers to contact their international customers that have traveled from China to the U.S. to follow up with their state health departments. With the information and data provided by the WHO and conferring with the CDC and HHS, along with the governors of the 57 states and territories, I will be enacting the Defense Production Act to ramp up production of personal protective equipment for our first responders and healthcare workers. We also will include guidance to produce testing materials and reagents. The order will include, but not be limited to, N95 masks, protective garments, and other protective equipment to protect our healthcare workers and health responders. We will be reviewing the inventory of our federal stockpile to see if there's anything currently available we should advance to the states and territories to prepare if it becomes necessary to combat the virus here at home until they are able to get the needed supplies. And finally, since this virus is an airborne virus, as a means of providing a deterrent in the spread from person to person, I am declaring a health emergency, and in doing so, I am ordering all federal employees to wear face masks or face coverings while in public and interacting with the public. All persons engaging in businesses with the federal government and on all federal properties will be required to wear a mask or face covering while conducting business. The executive order will also include directions for governors to provide policy and guidelines for the use of masks and face coverings in their respective states and territories. The executive order will take effect within the next 48 hours, and to show you how important this measure is, I will not ask you to do something I wouldn't do. To prevent the possible spread, it will be advantageous for all of us to begin certain practices that will create a cleaner environment. Along with the use of masks or face coverings, we should wash our hands for at least 20 seconds, use hand sanitizers when we're not able to wash them. As we continue to ramp up testing protocols to track and trace any individual that may have contracted the virus, we all must do what we can do to protect each other. We will also continue to review actions to make sure we keep our community here within its borders as free of this virus to the best of our capabilities. We will beat this together. I will have Vice Admiral Jerome M. Adams, Surgeon General to the United States, discuss with you what the CDC guidelines are in respect to mask and face coverings. After he is finished, I will then take questions. Now, it's not a perfect statement, but given the need of the country at this moment, you can see exactly how it could have been put out there. And the thing is about the stock market that he's so into making sure that is running right at the first, at all, so that he can guarantee his re-election, then the stock market would have had some semblance of knowing that the federal government is working on a plan. And once the Defense Production Act puts the mask out there, companies would then be providing face masks and coverings to the public. We're seeing that now. We got all kinds of masks all over the place. What would have happened if all this galvanization happened at the beginning of February so as to put things in place to help prevent the spread of the disease and allow healthcare workers and hospitals to manage the outbreak than to be overrun with the outbreak? There are so many things that happened along the way that could have been a stop and a pause in this whole situation. And perhaps the lockdown may not have happened when it did we may have actually been able to maybe push it off a little bit. Kids may have been able to finish school if everyone had a face covering back then. We could have incrementalized the succession of events so that it wouldn't be like you're putting on your parking brake while you're going 60 miles an hour and everybody gets a jolt to the system. The response in this country was not the greatest response, Mr. President. It wasn't. This isn't a construction site where if you move bulldozers and diggers into the vacant lot and then have them just move dirt from one side to another, this doesn't make it look like that you're busy and that you're doing great construction work. It just means you're deceiving us, and you still are. You're looking to politicize the virus vaccine and pushing to try to get something before the election so that you can look like that you're the savior of the country. Is that what this was all about? To create a crisis, to have a crisis happen, and then as things gone on, you will look like the savior to the nation so that a grateful nation will re-elect you in November? I need for you to understand. Some people I know will probably, scream at me for saying this. But if you responded to this earlier, if you listened to the calls of action in regards to the people coming in from China back in January, when the outbreak first happened, you could have tracked and traced back then when it found out that it was going out of the country. You could have managed the situation. You could have controlled it. And action along the way could have helped everyone. And in doing so, what you're looking for, what you have been looking for all the time, could have been given to you back then. It could have created a sense of the fact that you actually did it. You did protect us. But you didn't. And I don't know why you can't get through that. And the people who are following you, your 35 to 40% of the population, your followers that will walk in lava for you. If you had done something all along and not tried to hoodwink us, to con us, into thinking everything is rosy and flowery, when it wasn't, your actions could have made you the hero that you think you want to be. The hero you think that people should see you as. That's what saying something to the country could do and would have done. And if you pull that off, Joe Biden would have said, damn it, he did it. He stepped up to the plate and hit it out there. You would have had the Democrats where you want them. Even Bill Clinton, when he was being impeached, was working for the country. He wasn't wallowing in self-pity. He was actually still working. He was walking and chewing gum at the same time as a metaphor. Wasn't the best thing, but he was still working for the country. You were golfing. You were holding rallies at a time when the nation needed its leader to do something to protect them. The calls were out there. The WHO didn't have this big banner, yeah, we have a pandemic and stuff at the beginning, because this was a new virus. This was a new thing out there that they had to understand. All of us, every government needed to understand. And the caveat the United States had before everyone else is that because it started in China, we could have seen everything incrementally moving toward us. And if we could see it incrementally moving toward us, we could have put up those barriers to protect the country. We don't want our president to fail. At least I do. I didn't vote for you. But my politics don't matter in this situation because we are the United States of America. We're not blue states, red states. We are a united people. The United States of America. You needed to step up and to protect all Americans. You should have used your ability and power to do something instead of sitting and wait for all those pricks to draw blood. Maybe the blood still would have come, but it wouldn't be 200,000 of them. The United States response wasn't the greatest response. We needed better than that. I don't want to die, Mr. President. I don't want to die. And as leader of this country, I need for you to understand that. I'm doing what I can to make sure that I am safe for my family. And I know one day I will. Mr. President, I don't want to die. And I hope you know that none of us want to.